Good morning, everyone. My name is Mel Hartley, and I'm one of the team here at the Training Accreditation Council. And I would like to welcome you to this webinar on navigating inclusive vet environments. Before we go any further, I would just like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land we are meeting on, which is the Whadjuk Noongar people, and recognise their continuing connection to the land, waters, and community. We pay our respects to elders past and present and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples. So before we begin, I just wanted to let you know that the Department of Employment and Workplace Relations have advised that they'll be releasing the final versions of the revised standards very soon. And subject to timing of regulatory amendments, it's expected that TAC-regulated RTOs will be required to meet the revised standards from July 2025. And we'll be providing ongoing information regarding the revised standards through the website, TAC Update and LinkedIn. Now I would love to hand over to Claire Werner, who is our facilitator for today. Thank you, Claire.
Thanks, Mel, and hi everyone. It's nice to have you all here with us today. So today we have a webinar on navigating inclusive vet environments, and it's a topic that we are getting a lot of questions about and people are very, very interested in. So for our session today, which is about 90 minutes, we've got a bit of an overview of what we want to touch on the screen at the moment. So we're going to have a very quick overview of the revised standards. Then we're going to move on to talking about inclusive vet environments and how that fits with the revised standards, learning environments that promote and support diversity. We're going to look at identifying the wellbeing requirements or needs of students, particularly from the vet student cohort, strategies to support vet students, and some additional considerations that sit around child-safe organisations and reasonable adjustment. And we will also have some time for questions. Now, Mel mentioned that we're going to use Mentimeter to take your questions, and this is the code that you see on the screen for Mentimeter. So you can either use their website and enter the code that you see on the screen, or you can scan that QR code and that will take you through to Mentimeter. So Mel and the TAC team are actually monitoring the chat today, and I'm just going to be talking with you. So please use the Mentimeter for your questions, and we will get to those at the end as long as we have time. So let's quickly talk about the revised standards, and some of you have already been to our workshops, potentially will have seen this slide before. So as you know, the Commonwealth has had this program of reform in the vet sector for many years, and a lot of those reforms are now being implemented. One of those is the quality reform, and it has some very specific objectives. So the idea of this reform is that it strengthens the focus on quality outcomes for students and employers from the vet sector, that it provides greater clarity for RTOs and for regulators around what those requirements are. It allows for more flexibility and innovation in training delivery. It better reflects the diversity of the vet sector, which is an incredibly diverse sector. Having worked in the vet sector now for nearly 40 years, I can certainly attest to that. And it really ensures that the standards are fit for purpose across different RTO settings. RTOs are something that have changed dramatically over the years, and we need to account for that. So as Mel mentioned, the revised standards are planned for implementation in July 2025, and they're made up of 3 documents that you will need to work with. The first of those documents are the outcome standards, and that is exactly what they are. They are the regulatory standards against which all RTOs are going to be measured in audit processes. They are outcomes-based standards, and we measure using the performance indicators that are reflected in those standards. You are able to access the drafts of these, and we are waiting for the final release of those from the Commonwealth. We have the compliance requirements, and they are the more administrative requirements that you need to address as an RTO. So, for example, do you have the required insurance? Are you using the NRT logo correctly? Those requirements were spread throughout our standards before, and now they're collected together into one document. And we also have the credential policy. Now, that policy details the requirements for vet trainers and assessors, and in our past regulation, these requirements were included in the standards in Schedule 1. So any changes that we made to any of the credential requirements were really time-consuming because we had to change a piece of legislation. The credential policy takes all of those things, puts them in one document that's more easily updated when we need to update it. So the information that is in that policy is something that's going to be really familiar to you because it reflects all of the changes that were sitting in the early changes to the standards that were released in March last year. And it sounds very strange to say it was last year. There is also a policy guidance document that's been provided by DUA, and we will refer to that briefly later in this session. That's also going to support the revised standards. So TAC has been progressively providing guidance to RTOs about standards, and this is accessed from our online guidance hub. And you can access that from the TAC website. And any changes as they come through, or as fact sheets get updated, or as these webinars get offered, you'll be able to access all of those things from this online guidance hub. So we would suggest that you save it as one of your favourites so that you can stay up to date with all of the latest information and advice. So I'm sure all of you have had an opportunity to have a look at the revised standards, and you'll know that there are a number of areas in those standards that are a little different to what we have had there in the past. And the idea of today is that we get to explore a few of these areas in some more detail. We are going to look specifically at diversity and inclusion, and there are a number of webinars, including this one, and cultural awareness training that you might attend. We're going to look at wellbeing, what that means in your organisation, child-safe organisations, and there's a webinar that you can review on that. And in particular, today we are going to focus on these two standards. Standard 2.5, which is about promoting and supporting diversity of vet students in the learning environment, which should be safe, inclusive and culturally safe. And Standard 2.6, which is about the wellbeing needs of students, those needs being identified and strategies are put in place to identify those needs. So while it might fit nicely onto this slide, in fact, there's quite a lot to talk about when we think about those two standards. So let's start with 2.5. So Standard 2.5 says that the learning environment promotes and supports the diversity of vet students, and we've got two performance indicators that we're going to work with. The first is that you, as a registered training organisation, foster a safe and inclusive learning environment for vet students. And the second is that you, as an RTO, foster a culturally safe learning environment for First Nations people. This standard is really designed to ensure that every student benefits from a learning environment that actually recognises and supports diversity. Understanding these changes is really crucial because it's going to allow you to implement strategies that one, comply with the standards, but enrich the learning experiences of the students that you have in your RTOs. And there are some key terms in here that we need to address. So the first of those is diversity. So diversity refers to a variety of differences amongst people, and this could be things like your age, your gender, your language, disability, ethnicity, your cultural background, sexual orientation, religious beliefs, many, many things. But it also includes differences in education, in work experience, socioeconomic backgrounds, family responsibilities. So embracing diversity means recognising and valuing all of these differences to create that more inclusive environment. When we're talking about safety and inclusivity, safe and inclusive environments are those where people feel welcome, where they can be themselves without fear of discrimination or harassment. So they tend to be characterised by places where you'll find equal opportunity, where you find respect for difference, and where there's a sense of belonging. So inclusive practice is really for every student. It establishes that foundation for an equitable, respectful, and supportive environment where all students, regardless of your background or your circumstances, can actually fully participate and thrive in that education experience. It's also worth focusing a little bit on safety here, because often when we talk about safety, it's limited to physical safety, but we're not just talking about physical safety, we're also talking about psychosocial safety. So psychosocial safety refers to an individual's perception that they can express their thoughts or ideas, concerns, make mistakes without fear of punishment, humiliation, or negative consequences. In the workplace or the learning environment, this actually means that people feel safe to take interpersonal risks, such as proposing new ideas, saying they're wrong, admitting an error. And what all of that does is fosters an environment that's conducive to learning, it's conducive to innovation, and it helps to make communication open. Cultural safety is really the practice of creating an environment that's safe and respectful for all people, especially those who are part of a minority culture. So in the Australian context, cultural safety is particularly significant for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples, and it involves recognising and addressing that inherent power imbalance that exists between non-Indigenous institutions and Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples. So this really means creating spaces where Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people feel safe, where they feel respected, and they're able to express their cultural identities without fear of discrimination or marginalisation. Implementing cultural safety requires individuals and organisations to reflect and to acknowledge their own cultural biases and understand how these might affect their interactions with others. It also involves actively challenging systemic racism by recognising and responding to that power imbalance, and also between the trainer and the student, and reflecting on their knowledge and skills and attitudes, their teaching and assessment behaviours, and the conscious and unconscious biases that exist and impact what we do. Ultimately, though, cultural safety is determined by the experience of the person that's receiving the service. So only an individual can really assess whether the environment feels culturally safe. So it's incredibly important for you as providers to engage in a really open dialogue, to seek feedback, and to commit to continuous improvement to ensure that your practices are culturally safe and are inclusive. And To do that as an RTO, you're going to need to identify what the student's needs are. So there are many aspects of a person that might contribute to their need for support of some kind. Each of the aspects that's mentioned here on the slide in front of you is something for you to consider. Some of these aspects we are used to identifying and supporting. So, for example, LN&N, or the need for disability support. They are things that we have been providing support for in the vet sector for many, many years. Other aspects, while familiar to all of us really, are quite new to be sitting in the regulation. What's really important to acknowledge is that every student is unique and is going to come with a unique need and unique requirements. The more diverse a student's background is, the more varied and complex their needs might be. This is called intersectionality. And so what intersectionality is, it's a framework that actually recognises how different aspects of a person's identity, such as some of those things we mentioned earlier, race, gender, age, disability, socioeconomic status, how all of these things intersect. And in that intersection, they create a unique experience for people. And that experience could be privilege, it could be discrimination, and it could be disadvantage. So what intersectionality does is it highlights that diversity is not just about these individual categories, but how they interact in very complex ways. Understanding intersectionality ensures that when you're putting policies and practices in place, they address this systemic inequality and they create more inclusive and supportive environments for students. So a one-size-fits-all approach to diversity inclusion doesn't recognise the complex challenges that students face with overlapping identities. When we seek to understand our students' needs, when we look at the whole person, not through a siloed lens, but through one that does in fact recognise and acknowledge and address all of these complexities, that's when we can really make a difference for the student. So identifying the needs of the student can happen in lots of different ways. So let's consider a few of the things that we might do in our organisations. So we're going to move across to Mentimeter now, and you can see that on the screen you have a list of different things that you might use in your RTOs. So our question to you is, which of these approaches do you actually use in your RTO? And as you start to click on which ones you do use, you'll see the numbers starting to change. Okay. So when we have a look at what you have got here, I'm probably not surprised to see those first two sitting there, because I think the vast majority of people or RTOs do have some form of testing to support LN&N needs. And there are typically questions on an enrolment form that say, would you need any support? So student interviews are coming up, and that is a great way to collect some really rich data. We've got LMS data, again, some people using that, but much lower down on the scales that you've put there. We've got self-assessments, industry consultation, collecting and analysing feedback. And I think the thing that really we want to get across to you here is that every one of these approaches that are typically used in RTOs already provide you with an opportunity to use that information in more than one way. So while we might typically, for example, look at industry consultation and say, well, are we choosing the right units, and, are the case studies that we're using in our training reflective of what you would see in industry? In fact, those same questions can be asked and used to say, what do these students really need? Who are these people that end up in the workplace that might come to us as students first? So fundamentally, what we want you to do is to make sure that when you are thinking about how you can collect information about your students, that you use a diversity of information, use the range of information that's available to you, so that you do get really rich data and usable data about how you can support your learners. The last one that we've got there, collecting and analysing feedback. About 2 minutes ago, I think I said how important it is for you to have an open dialogue with your students, also with your trainers and assessors, to get feedback about what their experience is of the services that you use in your RTO or provide in your RTO. So our overall message is use everything that's available to you. So in the materials that were sent through to you, we put a couple of case studies in there. So these case studies are there to show you what this could look like in different RTOs. So one of those case studies is for Summit TAFE. And the other of those case studies is for a private RTO called Riverland Skills Training. These are imaginary organisations, but typical of something that you might find in a large metropolitan TAFE organisation, and what you might find in a smaller regional private RTO. So in scenario one, you can see that Summit TAFE has really got quite a structured approach to how they are ensuring that prospective students can make informed choices, that this is the right training organisation for them. And the way that they are providing that information starts right from the word go in terms of the marketing materials. It's provided in a number of different ways. Oh, thank you, Mel. So you can see the marketing material is provided in a number of different ways. We've got videos, we've got written information, we've got easy to read guides, and we've got some job role descriptions to actually help people understand what that career path might be before they enrol, because vocational training is all about jobs. So there's a self-assessment checklist that's available in multiple formats, and it encourages students to actually reflect on how they learn. So do you enjoy hands-on learning? Would you like support with digital tools? Simple questions that, when analysed, can help you figure out how you might actually support a cohort. There's an online enrolment process with a dedicated section for students to actually indicate if they need any support needs. And there are also non-digital options for students who want to use that. Once enrolled in the initial sessions, they focus on explaining the course requirements. There's a range of flexible support services available at any stage of the study. Throughout that program, there's feedback mechanisms in place. So some of them are anonymous, they're accessible options, and it's all about making sure that everyone has an opportunity to say how they are feeling, to have their voices heard. So this is one that a lot of people don't do. So the TAFE also analyses enrolment, feedback and support request data to identify patterns and emerging needs. So where consistent themes arise, such as students needing language support or digital literacy support, then the TAFE can implement some broader strategies to help students with those things. That might be introductory digital skills workshops, it could be communication training, it might be peer mentoring programs. There's lots and lots of different things that could be put in place. Fundamentally, though, I hope what you're seeing here is that this organisation is proactive and inclusive in the approaches that they use to make sure that learners have that opportunity to succeed. So this is an organisation, of course, a big organisation that has a lot of capacity and a lot of capability to do these types of things, and is not the only way that you can do that. When we look at scenario 2, it's a very different situation. So for this organisation, a really personalised approach is what ensures that students receive the support they need to actually succeed. So it's a small regional training provider, and what they value is face-to-face interactions and building strong relationships with their students right from the very beginning. So before anybody enrolls, every student has a one-on-one interview with the trainer. A conversation helps the provider understand what the student's interests and goals are and any support needs. This one-on-one approach really allows them to achieve the same outcome, but they're not using complex data systems to do it. So the trainer and a single administration officer actually keep these records of the student's needs and address the training accordingly. Marketing information about the courses is simple, it's practical, and it focuses on the realistic job expectations through conversations, local employer insights, and there are some printed materials as well. Students, if they need to, can complete a self-check to reflect on whether the course is a good fit for them. And again, those same types of questions that we had up front. Can we just go down a bit further, Mel? So once enrolled, students have got this close-knit learning environment where the trainers are easily accessible. There's ongoing discussions. Again, initial sessions focusing on clear explanations of what the expectations are and the types of support that might be available. Feedback data as they go is gathered through regular informal chats. There might be an occasional survey and direct check-ins with the students. Where multiple students share the same kind of challenges, again, the provider can adjust its teaching approach or offer small group sessions. So it doesn't really matter whether you are a big organisation with lots of systems and processes in place to support gathering information, or if you are small and you don't have those systems, you still have the people who can have the conversations. So gathering information about learners, about their needs, checking in with them, adjusting can happen in many, many different ways, and it should happen in many, many different ways. Now we're going to come back and talk to you about these resources and videos a little later. But first, what we're going to do is when you have gathered this information, before we think about what you might do with it, we want to talk to you about some key principles that would underpin everything that you did with this information. So the first thing, or the first key principle, is respect for diversity. And this involves you recognising and valuing the different identities, abilities, and experiences of your learner group. The second principle is equal access and opportunities. So this is about ensuring that everyone has the resources, support and adjustments needed to participate effectively. The third principle is removing barriers. So as you're thinking about what you're going to do with this information, it should be viewed through a lens of, am I removing barriers? So this is identifying and eliminating physical, digital, social communication barriers that actually prevent full engagement by the learner. The next principle is flexibility and adaptability. And this is about using multiple training and assessment methods, accessible content, individualised support to actually meet different needs. And I've got to say that I think in a lot of RTOs that I see, I think you're really good at this. Safe and supportive environments. This is about creating spaces where people feel welcomed, where they feel respected, where they feel empowered to contribute and actually express themselves. Active participation and voice is encouraging individuals to actually share their perspectives and shaping policies or learning environments based on these needs. So it doesn't matter what you do, underpinning everything that you do are these principles for inclusive practice. So where might we apply these things? Well, contrary to popular belief, inclusive practice is not just about training. Inclusive practice is a foundational principle that influences every aspect of how an organisation operates. And it ensures that individuals feel valued, respected, and empowered to contribute. So what you see on the screen is just a sample of how inclusive practice might be reflected in a training organisation and where these things link to other parts of our regulation. So it begins with leadership and governance, and this is where inclusive policies and decision-making frameworks set the tone for equity and diversity in your organisation. Recruitment and onboarding processes are designed to actually attract and support people from diverse backgrounds, while ongoing training actually equips staff with the skills to recognise and address barriers to inclusion. In service delivery, which in our case is education, inclusive practice ensures that resources, communication, environments are accessible to everyone, and we adapt to the needs of the individuals. Feedback mechanisms provide everybody with a voice, enabling an organisation to actually continually evolve and improve based on the lived experiences of their learners and of their staff. Inclusive practice also shapes organisational culture. So it fosters an environment where difference is celebrated and everyone feels a sense of belonging. Ultimately, it ensures fairness, it ensures equity and respect are embedded into all interactions, decisions and operations in an RTO. And this drives better outcomes for individuals and better outcomes for the broader community. So I'm going to pop back to Mentimeter again, and we have another question for you. And so our question is, what actions could you take in your RTO to ensure that an inclusive learning environment is in place for all students? Okay. So let's have a look at what we have got here. Front and centre, smack bang in the middle is the word accepted. So that is the word that most of you have said most frequently when you have responded to this question, is to accept the students that come to you, to accept all of the wonderfulness of their diversity. So there are a lot of other responses in there. A number of them: lead by example, model inclusive practice, applied UDL principles, role modelling. Those things are all incredibly important. If we don't see what we're supposed to be doing, it's very hard to feel safe. Again, there's a number of things in there about listening and seeking feedback. So we've got active listening, seeking feedback, being approachable, make sure needs are discussed, open communication, all of those things, that concept of communicating, taking and using that information is incredibly important. You've also got a lot of responses in there that are about providing information. You know, like one of the things that we will often find is people are, you know, maybe a little hesitant to actually say, I need some support. Because they fear, you know, what might happen. But again, putting out those positive messages in information about the kind of support that we can provide, how we want to behave, and what that can mean for you is incredibly important. Having skilled trainers, PD for trainers, self-education. Again, we as individuals are the ones that can make a difference. So empowering people by giving them the knowledge and skill that they need to actually make the learning environments inclusive is incredibly important. So there's some great responses in there. Okay, so next question. So now let's take that same concept and think about it in the context of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, and how would we ensure the needs of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples are met? What could you do in your organisation? Okay, thank you. Again, some really fabulous responses in there. And there's a few that are sitting clustered in the centre that are ideal. So consultation, we need to ask. And one of the other things that we've got sitting up the top is have the courage to ask questions. So things that we don't necessarily understand, we tend to pull away from. So making sure that we actually ask questions, that we engage with our local Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples so that we understand their context and what their needs are becomes incredibly important. Creating inclusive environments and letting First Nations lead when you're going through that kind of consultation process and engaging and learning and asking questions, it gives us the opportunity to do that. So again, there's lots of those same concepts that we talked about before that are then contextualised to what we have for our Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. There's some really great ones in there. Listen with intention, two-way learning, teach on country. Fabulous, fabulous. And so our last question to you, what policies or staff training programs could you put in place that might help reinforce these practices? Okay. So again, we have some great responses in here. So sitting in our cluster in the centre, which is our most commonly used responses, we've got cultural awareness training. And sitting around that, there are a number of other things. For example, we have inclusion training sitting there, cultural awareness PD, cultural awareness programs. And there's no doubt that, putting tools in place and putting knowledge and skill in place for your trainers and assessors will make a very, very big difference here. There's a couple of plans that are mentioned in there. So the RAP, the Reconciliation Action Plan, and there's a Diversity and Inclusion Plan also in there. Here we are, Diversity and Inclusion Policy or Plan. Again, it makes the things that you are doing in your RTO very intentional when they are planned. And so it's a structure that supports the behaviour of the individuals in your organisation. We've also got a few things in there sitting around mental health first aid, and it's certainly something that I hear a lot more RTOs talking about in terms of the mental health needs of the learners. Another program that I hear a lot about is the accidental counsellor. So there are a number of things that you can do in your organisation, and when you embed these things in policy, in process, and in the plans and tools that you use in your organisation, you empower people to make a difference. One of the other things that is sitting in here that I saw was around the delivery plan design and the training resources policy. So it's not just about the external things that we might do as a trainer and assessor. These things should be embedded into the very day-to-day work that we do in a training organisation, and thinking about those things in how you design the learning experiences and the resources that you use, again, is a really important tool for your trainers and assessors and for your learners. Okay, let's go back to the slides. Okay, so I think Mel popped she popped some links in the chat there for you. I'm just going to go back to this one. And I want to talk to you about a framework that's been put out by the Victorian government called the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Cultural Safety Framework. And what this framework does is it provides a continuous quality improvement model that organisations could use to help create safe environments. So that is a document that you could have a look at and take from that document to see how it could be applied in your organisation. So it's sitting there as a resource for you. And there is another institute called the Australian Institute of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Studies, and that institute actually offers a whole lot of resources and programs to actually strengthen organisational cultural capability and promote greater awareness of Indigenous cultural heritage. So there's a couple more resources that you could use there. Okay, so let's move to standard 2.6. So this standard is where we get the wellbeing word. So this standard is making sure that the wellbeing needs of the vet student cohort are identified and strategies are put in place to support these needs. And again, we have a couple of performance indicators that RTOs will be measured with. So firstly, that as an RTO, you identify the wellbeing needs of the cohort as relevant to the training content, it's Monday, and appropriate wellbeing support services. And that you advise vet students of the actions they can take, the staff they can contact, and the wellbeing support services that are available. So there are some really key terms in this standard as well, the first of them being wellbeing. So wellbeing is really how we think, how we feel, how we act, and how those things affect the various aspects of our daily lives. That includes our work, our relationships, our study, and we're going to talk a lot more about that in just a minute. By reference to the training product content, what that really emphasises is that RTOs should be considering the specific requirements and nature of the training products they are offering when they're identifying and addressing the wellbeing needs of the cohort. So what this can mean is that the content and the structure, the delivery methods of each training product could actually influence the types of wellbeing services that a student may require. And we're going to give some examples of that, so don't worry too much about that. When we are talking about well-being, it's really important to acknowledge that well-being is a deeply personal state. And it encompasses the balance of many aspects of an individual's life. So it involves finding a harmony that works uniquely for the individual, recognising what contributes to one person's well-being may differ for another. So in other words, what I need for my well-being, what you need for your well-being are likely to be quite different. This personalised approach really underscores the importance of tailoring self-care and mental health strategies to fit the needs and circumstances. So well-being typically has a number of domains, and that's what you're seeing on the screen in front of you. So we certainly have physical well-being, which involves good health, our body functioning properly. That includes things like nutrition, exercise, the absence of disease. Emotional well-being really relates to managing your feelings, coping with stress, and how you maintain a positive outlook in your world. Mental well-being really involves cognitive health. So this is about your ability to think clearly, make decisions, and engage in lifelong learning. Social well-being includes the supportive relationships that you have in your world and that sense of belonging being able to actively participate in community and social activities. Economic well-being really refers to financial stability, access to resources, and the ability to meet your basic needs. And environmental well-being really involves living in a safe and healthy environment that actually supports quality of life. So the relationship between an individual's actions to maintain or improve well-being and the support that's provided by a training organisation is complementary. While individuals are ultimately responsible for their own well-being, training organisations can play a critical role in actually creating an environment that supports and enables students to take care of themselves. So fundamentally, this balance is really a shared responsibility. So when we think about that concept, there's things that individuals do and there's things that RTOs do. So individuals, it's about practicing self-care. It's about managing stress. And that might be, developing personal coping mechanisms like mindfulness, journaling, taking breaks when you need them, seeking help. So recognising when you actually need assistance and reaching out to the available resources. So again, this could be things like counselling services, it could be peer support, it could be reaching out to the friendship group. Balancing the responsibilities, I think this is one we probably all struggle with from time to time. Managing study, work and your personal life to prevent burnout. Engaging in positive social interactions, so making sure that you build relationships that actually foster support and belonging. And all of those things sit really within the realm of the individual. When we're talking about RTOs and their role in supporting wellbeing, it's really about creating an environment that actually enables students to maintain or improve their wellbeing. So providing resources. Now, again, depending on the size of your organisation, offering counselling services might be that you actually have internal counsellors. It might be you provide referral information to external counsellors. It might be that you have an EAP in your organisation. It can look like lots of different things. You might offer some mental health workshops, and you might facilitate access to external support networks. There's many things that you can do there when we say provide resources. Creating that safe environment, this is really ensuring the physical and psychological safety of students through appropriate policies, inclusive practice, and accessible learning spaces. Encouraging healthy habits. This could be promoting activities like physical movement breaks. Make sure you've got people standing up and moving around. Stress management programs, having healthy eating options on campus. All of those things are things that sit within your control. Fostering connections. This is about creating opportunities for peer networking, for mentoring, for community building amongst the cohort of your learners. And actually identifying needs. And this might sound obvious, but really it's about regularly assessing the wellbeing needs of the student cohort and adapting the support services according to those needs. So it's incredibly important for us to acknowledge the interplay between individual actions and organisational support, because that interplay is what is really vital for holistic wellbeing. So when we're talking about these things, it's really empowerment through resources. You as a training organisation can empower individuals by equipping them with the knowledge and tools that they need to take charge of their wellbeing. So this might be, for example, through time management workshops, through information that you provide in your RTO. You can reinforce good habits by promoting healthy behaviours, offering a supportive environment, reinforcing the importance of self-care and resilience for the individual. You can also bridge gaps. There are many people, many students that lack the awareness or the resources to address their own wellbeing needs. So training organisations can really fill this gap by providing guidance and access to resources. And you could also provide tailored support. So while individuals might focus on their own unique needs, RTOs can address collective challenges, so managing stress through exam periods or on Mondays, with cohort-wide initiatives that you might actually be able to structure. So it's not all about you and it's not all about them. It's about how you work together to actually make sure that wellbeing needs are supported. So let's come back to thinking about the training product. The nature of the training product and the demands that it brings is something that can be taken into account and ameliorated by RTOs. So if you think about the different types of training products that are offered and the specific demands related to that content, to the structure and delivery methods, there are a lot of things that you can do. So, for example, courses with a high physical demand. So this might be construction, it might be fitness, it could be firefighting training. In fact, I saw that the other day, where you can actually structure things so that there's information about injury prevention. You might have stretching routines in place. There might be workplace safety practices. You might ensure breaks during really physically demanding sessions to actually prevent exhaustion. And that's what I saw with the firefighting training. The training was structured so that in between those times when they were actually having to learn to fight the fires, they were having enough rest to enable them to go into the next exercises. Some simple, really simple things that you can do. Let's say you've got a course that's got a high emotional intensity to it. So maybe something like social work or counselling or community services. You could establish peer support groups so that students could share their experiences and their coping strategies. You could provide access to mental health resources, including counselling resilience workshops. You could offer debriefing sessions after emotionally challenging content or role plays that they might be engaged in. So again, a number of things that you can do. Think about online or remote learning courses. You know, often people feel very isolated when they're engaging in that type of learning. So you could develop strategies to reduce that isolation. So it could be virtual study groups or discussion forums where they actually get to interact with the other learners. Provide access to IT support to address technical issues promptly. So in this webinar, for example, we have TAC in the background who have been addressing your issues through the chat. You could ensure clear communication about support services, including mental health hotlines for remote students. So one of the images that you see on the screen here is someone driving a forklift. And there are a lot of training products that are offered in the vet sector that are offered as single units of competency. And as a result, often those courses are quite short. So some of the things that you could consider in that situation might be to offer pre-course instructions or expectations to actually reduce anxiety on the day so people get used to what they're coming to. That might include outlining the day's structure, what the learning objectives are, making sure people are comfortable in the context of what they're coming into, including information about support services that might be available during the day. This could be, for example, as simple as a dedicated point of contact for your concerns. You could take short breaks to prevent fatigue because they're often quite intensive courses. Get the students to stretch and recharge. You could offer the participants a chance to provide anonymous feedback about their experience, including suggestions to improve wellbeing support in the future. You could provide access to materials or recordings for review, reducing the pressure to retain everything during that session. And again, this is one of the strategies that we use in these webinar series, where we provide you with access to information, the recording of the session, and fact sheets that support them. So by aligning wellbeing strategies with the specific demands of the training product, as RTOs, you can really provide targeted support that effectively addresses the unique challenges that the students might actually encounter during their learning journey with you. So we have had a massive lot of information for you to think about so far. And so now we need to think about, well, how do you get started in actually making sense of all of this and using it? And the first step is always to plan and prepare. So think about what are your objectives? Define the objectives, what you're trying to achieve. Articulate what wellbeing indicators need to be monitored. Is it stress? Is it anxiety? Is it social isolation? And then select the appropriate tools. So you choose a mix of like quantitative, qualitative things. So quantitative, am I going to use surveys? Am I going to use LMS analytics? Am I going to take qualitative measures? Am I going to do interviews? Am I going to do focus groups? What methods am I going to use to actually get the information that I can use? Then you're going to train staff to make sure that all staff and educators are trained in recognising the early signs of wellbeing issues and familiar with the tools that they use. Collect the data. Administer the surveys and assessments at regular intervals. So it might be at the start of a term, mid-semester, end of term, and track changes in the students over time. Schedule regular check-ins. So have a schedule there for one-on-one meetings, either in person or via digital platforms, so you can gauge how the learners are going. You might do focus groups, a session to explore, what the challenges are for the group. And really what those focus groups do and those one-on-one check-ins do is really give you more in-depth data than you're going to get typically from a survey. You can collect observational data. Encourage your educators to actually document the observations and flag concerns when they're getting a consistent message from the learners. Use technology, leverage the data that you have, the LMS data, digital analytics, and make sure that you understand what that information is actually telling you, because that is what will allow you to interpret it. So when we are looking at analysis and interpretation, it's about really combining the insights from all of those things so that you can look for common themes. So is it increase? Does stress increase or decline over time? What other things are actually happening? Break down that data by demographics or specific student groups to identify if particular segments actually require additional support. Once you understand what that data is telling you, then you can make a plan for action. So you might have some targeted interventions based on that analysis. Like we said, could be something as simple as peer support programs. It could be as complex as counselling sessions. You're going to allocate resources to that. So there might be mental health professionals involved. There might be academic advisors involved. It might be you as the trainer assessor. It might be you referring someone externally. You're going to communicate clearly, let the students know what's available, how to access it, and ensure there's transparency and ease of access. And I'm sure you have all used websites where getting to the information that you need is incredibly difficult. So make sure you make it easy. Step 5 is about implementing and follow up. So whatever your plan is, you're going to roll that out in a structured way, clear timelines and responsibilities, and knowing how you're going to monitor the effectiveness of what you're doing. So you track the impact of these interventions. And again, some of those same methodologies that you used up front to figure out what people need, you might use again here. So you might have follow-up surveys, you might have additional check-ins, you might have ongoing data analysis. You need to establish that feedback loop. Encourage that continuous feedback from your students to refine and support those measures over time. And for those of you who know me, you would have probably heard me say this 1,000 times. Close the loop. So whatever you're putting in place as an improvement, as a support strategy, you need to check it's working. And of course, in checking whether it's working, you have the opportunity to review and improve what it is you're doing. So, have debriefing sessions with staff to evaluate the effectiveness of the strategies and processes that you're putting in place, and use those insights that you gather from this ongoing monitoring to adjust your tools, to adjust your processes and adjust those interventions. And that will make sure that they remain relevant for the evolving needs of your student cohort. So this is a process that will not be unfamiliar to you, because it's the same kind of process that we put in place for all continuous improvement actions in our training organisations. So across the board, we have talked about inclusive practice, safe and inclusive practice, and we have talked about wellbeing. But in our new standards, there are also a couple more things that we need to touch on quickly. So the first thing is we have this requirement that sits around child-safe organisations. So if you are an RTO that has students who are under 18, then there are some additional requirements that you need to be aware of and taking into account of. And the child safe requirements that sit in our regulation is really a government focus as a response to the finding of the Royal Commission into institutional responses to child sexual abuse. And of course, what that commission revealed was that there were systemic failures, as many organisations lacked adequate safeguards, allowing abuse to go unreported or to be poorly managed. So a child-safe organisation actually adopts a proactive approach, identifying and addressing the risks before the harm occurs. These requirements are not only part of the revised standards, but there are several legal requirements that organisations need to consider as well. So many of you will be familiar with the Working with Children requirements and the mandatory reporting obligations. There are also a set of national principles for child safety organisations, and on the screen in front of you are the 10 principles for child-safe organisations. Now, TAC has a webinar that was run earlier, well, actually, I think it was late last year now, by WACOS. And that webinar provides you with a lot of information around how these child-safe principles could be implemented in your RTOs and the kinds of things that you would actually need to consider. So you can access that webinar, and it's a 2-hour webinar on the online guidance hub, and it's in section 4.3, risk management. As all of these changes come into play in July, as you know, TAC has a whole lot of fact sheets that they use, and those fact sheets are all in the process of being updated as we speak. So once we actually have the regulation released, those new fact sheets will be finalised, and they will be also available to you. One of them is on child-safe organisations. So there's a lot of information and support available to you there for those of you who have students who are under 18. Reasonable adjustment is also something that we have talked about for a very long time, but bizarrely, it's not really understood that well just yet. So inclusive practice, and it is intimately linked with inclusive practice for every student. So it's that thing that establishes equity. Reasonable adjustment is a specific legal requirement for students with a disability or ongoing ill health. And reasonable adjustment often requires some form of modification to the learning and assessment strategy, sometimes extra resources and equipment, but always careful planning and preparation, including extensive consultations with the student, experts, and industry, just to name a few, are required to make sure that reasonable adjustment is exactly that. Inclusive practice is actually the guiding principle that underlies the concept of reasonable adjustment, and we have a webinar already, again, about reasonable adjustment, and we already have a fact sheet about reasonable adjustment. They have been written against the current standards. The legislative framework that exists around reasonable adjustment has not changed, but those resources, the webinar and the fact sheet, will be updated as the new regulation comes into play. So they will all be released shortly. Important for you to remember is that a modification of any kind needs to be carefully considered so that the integrity of the training product outcome is not compromised, and that the student's knowledge and skill can be replicated in the workplace to be deemed competent. Reasonable adjustment really offers flexible learning options. So it could be something like face-to-face online blended learning to accommodate different needs. You might provide someone with self-paced learning modules for students who require that additional time. You might provide access to accessible learning materials. This might include things like large print. It might be audio. Could be learning materials in a digital format. Things like ensuring screen reader compatibility for all online content, using high contrast visuals, dyslexia-friendly fonts. There are many, many things that you could be doing. Providing assistive technology, so it could be allowing the use of speech to text, text to speech, or magnification software, providing hearing loops, closed captions for audio or video content, alternative keyboards, adaptive mice, ergonomic support. There are many, many things that could be provided in a learning environment. When it comes to assessment methods, again, depending upon the requirement of the training package and the outcomes that must be demonstrated, and that underpins everything, then there may be things that you can do in the assessment that would allow someone to participate without compromising the outcome of the unit of competency. That could include, for example, some verbal assessment. It might be practical demonstrations instead of written exams. It could be portfolio assessment, case studies, projects instead of timed tests, allowing extra time, allowing assessments in multiple short sessions. So many things for you to consider in the context of your training product. You might also offer modified assessment conditions. So you might give someone some extra reading time or processing time for students with dyslexia or some kind of cognitive disability. In some cases, there might be an opportunity to use interpreters or readers or scribes, again, when the training product actually allows that to happen. Or you might conduct assessments in quiet or familiar environments for students with anxiety. So really, the reality is when it comes to reasonable adjustment, there are just such a multitude of things that you could do, but it's all dependent upon what the needs of that individual are, what the needs of the training package are in terms of the outcomes that must be demonstrated, and you going through this consultative process with the learner to determine what is actually right for that person. So, as we said, for child-safe organisations, watch out for the new fact sheet that's coming and reasonable adjustment webinar. So there are a lot of resources that are available for you to use. The revised standards, when we have the final version, which is not too far away. DUA publication, they have policy guidance that's available, and it's also available from TAC's online guidance hub. We have a plethora of fact sheets that are available to you and all of the information from these webinar series. We are putting out information, ongoing communication in the TAC updates that come to you. If you have not registered for those TAC updates, then please do so. And make sure you visit the TAC Online Guidance Hub because that is where we are putting all of the latest information that becomes available to us so that you have it as soon as we have it. We also have, of course, our YouTube channel, and you can access that and LinkedIn. So now we come to, and we've got about 10 minutes to answer any questions that you might have. So we'll certainly answer them if we can. If we can't answer them, we might come back to you after the session.
Before we start on this question, we just had one come through the chat about mandatory reporting. And I just wanted to let you know that I highly recommend everyone looks at the WA Ombudsman mandatory reportable conduct scheme because that applies to RTOs. So I've just popped up our first question here. Hopefully you can see that through Menti.
Yes. Good question. So there's really two terms that we use in the vet sector. So when you look at the principles of assessment, there's something in there where we talk about flexibility and fairness. And we also use the term reasonable adjustment. So we have specific legislation that uses the term reasonable adjustment, and that's the Disability Standards for Education of 2005. So reasonable adjustment as the legal term, yes, applies to students with disability and health needs, ongoing ill health. We also have this principle of assessment that is about fairness and flexibility. And really, it's that flexibility aspect of it that we are using for other students. And many of the things that we do in both cases might in fact be similar. So there's a little bit of a blurring between the use of those terms. Well, that is a very good question. So this is something that I say to people a lot. When we talk about audits, I always say to people, this is your audit. So in an audit situation, when we talk about these standards and we talk about engagement and understanding, what we want from you is that you can clearly explain to us how you have looked at your student cohort and how you have designed a learning and assessment approach that is actually engaging for that cohort. So I don't know that there is a set measure that we would ever say we were going to use to say this is how we're going to measure engagement and understanding, but we are going to look at the entire approach that you use as an organisation to figure out what's going to work for that group. Another very good question. I would say yes, because you want to make sure that you are referring students to reputable organisations and that the services that they provide would in fact meet what we would expect in terms of legality, professionality, and suitability for the learner group that you would actually be providing that information to.
All right, that's all our questions. So I'll bring us back over to the PowerPoint.
Okay. Okay, so let's summarise what we have talked about today. So we just had a very quick look at the structure of the revised standards. Again, we are expecting implementation July 2025. So please make sure you keep up to date with that information. As soon as the standards are enacted, we will let you know. We've talked about the key principles for inclusive practice and that those principles underpin everything that you do in an RTO. So it's not just about the training and assessment, it is about everything that you do as a training organisation. We have touched on cultural safety for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples. Now that is the one webinar that has not been recorded. Is that right, Mel?
Yeah, that's right. It was cultural sensitivity.
Yes.
It was us that we didn't record that one, but there are materials available on our website that were provided on the day.
Okay, so you can access all of those. We've talked about the domains of wellbeing and understanding that wellbeing is a shared responsibility between the individual and the training organisation, and it's that interaction that exists between you and your students and what you do that actually helps and empowers people to manage their wellbeing. We've talked about the practical steps that you need to take from planning through to implementing and monitoring what you have done and how effective that is. And we've also just touched very, very quickly on the special considerations that exist for RTOs who have students who are under 18, the child safe requirements and reasonable adjustment. And there is a lot of information that is already available on those two requirements from TAC's website. And we have pointed you to some further information which is on the Guidance Hub. So we do recommend that you follow TAC on LinkedIn and YouTube or sign up to TAC Talks and the newsletter. There's a lot of information that comes to you through those channels. And we also have a feedback survey. So there, Mel has actually just popped that in the chat box. So if you were to click on that link and provide TAC with feedback about how you found the webinar session today, then they're continuously improving what it is we do and what we offer to you. And we would certainly be interested to know how you found things. So thank you so much for joining us on a Monday morning. Your ideas that you have put in the Mentimeter responses are all going to be available to you in that the recording that comes out to you, and we really do appreciate you participating and helping us to make this webinar series work. So thank you again for your time today. and we hope you enjoy the rest of your Monday.